Sorry for the 5 minutes of waiting. As you can imagine, there's always a technical glitch with these things, but thank you all for joining. We're all online now, I hope, and I hope everyone can hear me. My name's Ian Fenn. I'm talking from Consumers International. I'm involved here, if Bettina, you could move to the next slide, please. I'm involved here because Consumers International co-leads the UN's 10YFP Consumer Information Programme, under which the report we'll discuss today is published. And it is published. If you haven't already, you can find the link to download the report in the webinar invitation that we sent out. So the report is published under the Consumer Information Programme, and the topic of product lifetime extension, or durability, call it what you will, is something that we want to work more on under this programme. That programme, as many of you are aware and are involved in, is a collaborative programme on many topics of consumer information for sustainable consumption. So together we're looking to support the provision of quality information on goods and services, and different effective strategies to engage consumers in sustainable consumption. So this area is not the only thing that we work on, but it's a topic we want to build on. And we do that through producing some research like this, supporting some projects around the world, but also coming together to work together, link up, and develop projects or fundraising proposals on a larger scale, which we may look to do on the topic of product lifetime extension. Today we'll hear from some of our advisory committee members to the programme, and some other experts in the field. Which, as the agenda shows, I'll stop speaking very shortly so we can get on with things, and I'll pass over to Bettina, who will talk briefly from UN Environment's perspective. Then Dr. Connie Bakker from TU Delft will talk you through the report we're launching today. Before we hear some perspectives and other work in the field from Sylvain Chavassou from the Ministry for Ecological and Solidary Transition in France, Virginia Antonioli from Instituto Co2 in Brazil, and Simon November from Test and Coupe, or Test Achat, in Belgium. Sadly, Cecile from Wrapup is unable to join us now, but we've still got plenty to get through, and hopefully that means there's still more time for some discussion and questions and answers at the end. If you do have any questions throughout, then please write them in the chat box or the question box, so that I can gather them, and then we'll ask those at the end. And if you have any problems with any technical problems or anything, then also just send those questions through there. I hope that's okay. I hope you're all hearing me well enough, and I'll pass straight over to Bettina. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. And very nice to speak to you all today. I just wanted to say some words to start with, as we are launching this new report today. And we are very happy to connect with all of you. The report is entitled The Long View, Exploring Product Lifetime Extension, as you can also see here on the screen. And first of all, we would really like to thank the French government for their support of this work, and also for providing such valuable insights and experiences on this topic. And further, we would of course like to thank TU Delft, because they have authored the report, and also express our gratitude to all of the experts and partner organizations that have provided comments and examples that are enriching the report now. So a big thank you to all of you. So why do we work on this topic? Why is it important to look at product lifetime extension? Some of you might know the Earth Overshoot Day. This year, this was on August 2nd. What it means is that by that day, we had consumed more resources than our planet produces in the whole year. And this is, of course, not only this year, since Earth Overshoot Days exist for many years. This adds up to the multiple planets we already consumed over the last years. So the problem is that short use and fast replacement of products is increasingly dictating consumption patterns in many regions. And we all know that there's expected doubling of the global middle class in the coming years. And so this means that the way we consume has an ever-growing influence on the planet and its ability to support us. And this speaks to the urgency for transition to a more circular economy and to sustainable consumption and production practices. It is recognized in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals, which has sustainable consumption and production at its core as one of the SDGs. It's SDG number 12, as I'm sure many of you know. So this agenda offers us a really good opportunity to reframe our policies and practices around core elements of sustainability, inclusiveness, and innovation. And coming back to the report, we think that product lifetime extension makes a specifically compelling case because it reduces resource use and waste, while at the same time preserving the economic value embedded in products. So what that means that it's a win-win for the environment and the economy, because businesses can save costs and consumers will get better value for their money. But this is a very rational argument, but we all know that our decisions are not always based on rationality, and we do not take our decisions in a vacuum. And it is therefore key to have measures in place that enable and encourage consumers to take action. And this includes ensuring availability of repair, for instance, or promoting service and sharing-based models. So this report that we are launching today proposes concrete measures to be taken by private sector, governments, and consumers, both in developing and developed countries, and gives recommendations to help policymakers worldwide to set enabling conditions for companies and consumers to extend the life of products. And we hope that with the support of the 10YFP Consumer Information Program and the network of partners, we at UN Environment can continue to encourage effective practices and help enable all stakeholders to take the long view on product design and use. And I'm happy to now pass on to Dr. Connie Bakker, who will walk you through the details of the report.
Thank you very much, Bettina, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. I'm really honored. My name is Connie Bakker. I'm from TU Delft, and on the screen you can now see our beautiful campus at TU Delft in the Netherlands. And the view that you see on the picture is more or less the view that I have from my office right now. So I'm in a good place at the moment, and I hope you are too. I want to talk a little bit about the report I authored together with my colleague Cheyenne Schuit from TU Delft. Can I have the next slide? And we were asked by the United Nations Environment Programme to address the following questions. What are the policy options for product lifetime extension? That's a big question to ask, and especially from a University of Technology, because we, of course, are technologists and engineers and not policymakers. So we tried to address this question as best as we could. And we started by addressing it through a literature review on understanding better what product lifetime extension actually means in practice, and to what extent should we actually aim for product lifetime extension? Does it make sense from an environmental perspective? That was actually the first sub-question we addressed. Next slide. Yes, so when should we aim for product lifetime extension? And we reviewed 7 different product categories, and you can actually see them in the small icons on the cover of the report. And I'll talk through them in a minute. And we did this by looking at a specific kind of literature, which is called LCA literature, or life cycle assessment literature, which are reports that try to assess the total environmental impact of a product over its entire lifespan, from production to distribution to use to end of life. And the life cycle assessment study then tries to assign a certain impact number to a specific product category in terms of how high its impact is on the environment. And one of the questions we asked then, so does it make sense from an environmental perspective based on these LCAs to replace a product at a certain point in its time, or should we keep it for longer? So we looked at a lot of literature, both based in developed economies and in developing economies. And I'll run you through our main conclusions. But first, next slide, I want to say a few words about product lifetime in general and the way we have framed it in this report. Now, I hope you have seen a slide like this before, or something like this before. This is a representation of what we call the circular economy, and I have used this particular image from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the circular economy. And what this basically says, and I'll talk you through the figure very quickly in order to explain how we look at product lifetime. So if you look at the dotted line, the vertical dotted line, you can see what we now call the linear economy, which is basically you produce a product, you use a product, and then after use, it's sort of, you discard it and it goes to landfill, for instance. That's the vertical dotted line. It's a production system that is still very dominant currently. And where we want to go to, where we want to move towards or transition towards, is a circular economy. So this is that's where all the loops come in. This is where we try to reuse a product or repair it or maintain it better or refurbish it or remanufacture it. And if nothing else can be done, we can always recycle it. And I'm now talking about the right-hand side of this diagram. And on the left-hand side, we're looking at a biological cycle, so where products based on biomaterials can also be looped in different ways using different kinds of processes. As you probably can hear, I'm not an expert on the biocycling part of this circular economy. I'm really much more into the technical side of the circular economy. This is where we focused on. And for us, it is important that product life and product life extension is not just about using a product for longer as a user, so just keeping it in your house for longer. It is also about reuse, and it's about repair, and it's about refurbishment and remanufacturing. So that's important to keep in mind. And we've looked at all these different processes, and they are also included in the policy recommendations as well. Next slide. So just giving you the brief run through of the 7 different product categories we looked at. We've grouped them together a bit based on the results. And washing machines and refrigerators, of course, these are highly use-intensive products. They take a lot of energy to make, and they also take a lot of energy and water and detergents in the case of washing machines to use. So they have both an impact during production, and they have quite a big environmental impact during use, then again at the end of life. So what is the best possible moment to replace washing machines and refrigerators? Well, literature more or less shows that we should move to more energy efficient models after approximately 10 years. And this is very approximate, so it could be 8 or 12 or maybe even more. So this literature is not very conclusive on that, but at least it gives an idea that we shouldn't replace them very often, and that replacement becomes more urgent as much more efficient models come into the market. So if you have a washing machine that is all of a sudden, if a new generation comes along, that is all of a sudden, say, 3 times as efficient as the current washing machines, we should probably replace them sooner. Whereas if energy efficiency improvements go quite slow, we can keep them for longer. So again, there's not one conclusive answer, but the answer that we give here is indicative of the developments in the market at the moment. In general, people do keep their washing machines and refrigerators for about 8 to 10 years. So we are in a pretty good place here. Next slide. We're not in a very good place with vacuum cleaners, mobile phones, clothing, and laptops, because these products are typically products that are replaced before their time, which means they are replaced before they actually should be replaced in terms of environmental impacts. Because again, a lot of energy goes into making mobile phones, laptops, clothing, and vacuum cleaners. And if we then discard them quite quickly, all this energy embedded and all this impact embedded in the product goes to waste. So these are typically the kind of products that should be used longer and that should be reused in a circular economy, for instance, through repair or refurbishment. Next slide. Now, TVs is an interesting and different category, because what we see in the TV market is that we had quite a huge energy efficiency improvement when the LED TVs were introduced to replace the older, these big boxes of televisions that we used to have. But now again, as technology develops further, we're seeing even newer models that have become less energy efficient. And that is because of their being, ultra high definition television and then becoming more and more connected. So the latest generations are actually using more energy than the previous generations. So here, weirdly enough, it seems like a better idea to keep the old ones longer than to upgrade to new ones. This is a typical example of where, well, next slide. It's a typical example of where successive generations of electronic products are not always more energy efficient. And that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about product life extension, so that we don't always want to upgrade to the latest models, because they're not always the best choice in terms of energy efficiency. But we also noticed in our review that when you replace a product as a consumer, the old product is not always taken out of circulation. And this can be a good thing, because if you replace your old mobile phone with a new one, the old ones often has a second life, for instance, as a refurbished phone in the same market, or as a refurbished phone in a different market. So this means that again, our data from life cycle assessment perspective is flawed because we only take into account this one specific lifespan of a product, and we don't take into account what happens to a product that is not taken out of circulation after it's been replaced. So again, our LCA data is a little bit off here. Next slide. So yeah, as I just said, life cycle assessment studies in the literature are not very conclusive. I really wished I could have given stronger arguments and more solid statements, but there's simply not enough real-world data available to make these studies more robust. So the overall perspective and conclusion that I drew from this quite extensive literature review is that generally speaking, many product categories would benefit from a product life extension, but that's very general speaking. And it's not true for each. So next slide. So this led me to a number of policy recommendations, and it's important, I think, to realize that we've taken actually two different policy perspectives on product life extension. Because this is how we found in the literature the discourse going, and how we also found, talking to different parties, that there seem to be two sort of distinct ways of looking at product life extensions from a policy perspective. And one we've called the open source perspective, which is essentially about empowering consumers to repair their own products, for instance. And the second one is called the closed loop perspective, which has as a main value the unburdening of consumers. They're both very positive, but they're a little bit different in the way they approach product life extension. Next slide. So this beautiful picture made by my colleague explains the open source perspective in a bit more detail, and I hope you can see it, because it's a little bit, on my screen at least, slightly a bit small, but I'll just talk you through it. So from the open source perspective, which is about empowering consumers, so enabling and supporting them to extend the lifetime of their products, we already see quite a nice set of policy instruments in development. For instance, in France recently, the law against planned obsolescence was introduced. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this new law develops, and whether or not class action suits will be filed, and how these will be dealt with. Because it's absolutely important that we have some kind of cutoff point beyond which we say, well, producers, you need to make better stuff. So my recommendation is that that we should evaluate this law and see whether it's worthwhile to expand it across Europe and perhaps beyond. second policy recommendation is that we might want to look into minimum durability criteria, again, to create a sort of cutoff point for industry. Already we know that there are minimum durability criteria for light bulbs and vacuum cleaners. They have been incorporated into the Eco-Design Directive, and it might be interesting to see whether it's possible to create a more extensive set of these. A third point is product lifetime labeling. There was a study done by the European Economic and Social Committee in 2016, which indicated that consumers were really interested in having an idea of product lifetime through labels, because it would enable them to make better buying decisions. Now, this is again something that may work, and it may also backfire in some way or another. So it's a big question mark for me, but a very interesting idea, which should definitely be looked into in more detail. So that's why it's under the recommendations. Fourth one is extended product warranty, which is, I believe, already under discussion at the moment. And the fifth and last one is the right to repair legislation, which actually claims that consumers should indeed have a possibility to safely repair products wherever that is possible, at least. And finally, things that would be extremely helpful in terms of future developments of policy on product lifetimes is to keep monitoring what's happening with product lifetimes. We've seen some studies arguing there's a decrease in product lifetimes going on worldwide. I recently have seen studies that actually argue the opposite. Product lifetimes are increasing again. So clearly, there's no consensus across the literature on what's happening to our product lifetimes, and we should have more research done in this field, because if we don't know what's happening, how can we build good policy? And the last point, naturally, consumer education and information. There's still so much unknown by consumers about product lifetime. There's lots of expectations that are either matched or not matched in the consumer world, and helping them understand better what they buy for their money is an important role. Next slide. So from the other perspective, which is about unburdening customers and actually enabling manufacturers to contribute to a more circular economy by giving them responsibility over their product, for instance, through new business models, that's a completely different perspective, where we actually argue consumers, producers, you should take responsibility because you are an important actor here. So just try to give consumers excellent service, but also make yourself responsible for taking back products at their end of life and maybe reusing them, refurbishing them, remanufacturing them, or at least taking care of good recycling. So a policy instrument that might be interesting here is looking at individual producer responsibility. So we know that we have producer responsibility is already part of our legislation, the WE directive, but it's an extended producer responsibility, but not an individual producer responsibility. So that means that you, producer, are responsible for your product, and you should get your product back and nothing else. Experiments have been done in Japan with this, which seemed to have worked well. So it may be interesting to start looking into possibilities, maybe pilots with individual producer responsibility. Second point, if we want to make this closed loop model work, we may have to remove legal barriers for refurbishment and remanufacturing. There's quite a bit of problems with trade barriers, not being able to ship broken products across borders, for instance, for very good reasons, by the way. But these regulations are now in the way of, for instance, doing remanufacturing or refurbishment. So that needs to be looked into, and it currently is, I believe. And finally, there's an issue, of course, if you go to new business models where consumers no longer own products, but are given access to products. and they have to hand those products back at the end of their lives, there may be issues with privacy that might need to be looked into as well. And finally, there's a few points. Again, same thing as by the previous, monitoring of trends in product lifetimes is extremely necessary also in this particular perspective. And of course, monitoring of consumer privacy issues, which becomes more salient in this particular perspective than in the open source perspective. Next slide. Of course, the previous two perspectives were really very focused on developed economies. And we also looked specifically at developing economies and what's happening there. And there's actually a very different story to be told. Because in many developing economies, reuse of products, repair of products is already very much part of the culture and of what people find, acceptable and normal. Things that can, however, be looked into in developing economies, for instance, an improvement of the waste treatment infrastructure, and a recognition of the full potential of the informal repair sector. Because although there is a lot of repairs happening at the moment, it is not always, it is often done in a sort of very informal sector with difficulties making actually these repairs energy efficient, making them safe, making them environmentally sound. So it may be worthwhile looking into this in much more detail to make these, to give these sectors, let's say, social rights, an official status, and therefore perhaps also training. Indeed, as I said, stimulate energy efficient repair of old appliances, because being a very active sector, this informal repair sector, they repair everything, but not always in the most energy efficient way. And that maybe if we can give training, etc., this may stimulate energy efficient repairs. Next slide. Again, consumer education information is also very important in developing economies. Perhaps introductions of energy efficiency labeling or other eco-labels might stimulate the more affluent households to invest in high quality, longer lasting or more energy efficient products, which would be a real improvement. And lastly, there may also be a need to develop monitoring and verification measures to help ensure that product lifetime standards and energy efficiency standards are met. Next slide. And this was my run-through of the report. Very briefly, the major conclusions. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Connie. For now, we're going to go straight through to Sylvain from the French Environment Ministry, but if any of you listening do have questions for Connie or for the other speakers, then you can either, again, write them in the chat box or the questions box, and we'll get to them at the end, or we'll just open up microphones at the end and have a direct discussion. But I'll pass on straight to Sylvain from the French Environment Ministry.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Yes, so congratulations to UN Environment and to TU Delft for this report. I think it's both concise yet quite complete on the topic. It's very useful. It investigates current literature and policies as well. It provides interesting product category cases and policy recommendations with an angle from for both developing and developed countries. So it will contribute to raising awareness at global level on this new and very important topic of longer lifetime for products in the context of a more circular economy. So if you can move to the next slide, please. I will address some of the things that we are doing or that are happening in France, both in the public sector and in the private sector and civil society. So as we have seen already, there is a dominant trend in business to push consumers to replace frequently their products, with heavy consequences in terms of use of natural resources, and changing this trend in our business models is going to take some time, but we can address it from both the production and the consumption side. And also, we shouldn't forget the role of consumers as well, because there's ambiguity on the part of consumers who, on the one hand, declare in many occasions that they would like better quality or longer-lasting products, but they also like to renew their products quite often for reasons, for example, of fashion and things like that. This role of the consumers, we will are waiting to see with great interest the study that the Commission is currently doing on the role of the consumers for the circular economy. So the circular economy, it's a new political priority in France, like in many other countries or areas of the world. We had a framework law on environment and energy and green growth in 2015 that includes a whole chapter on the circular economy. So there are initiatives from the government, the private sector, and civil society. On the next slide, please, I will talk to you a few minutes about public policies on the production side. So this law of 2015 introduced an official definition of planned obsolescence that is defined as all techniques by which a producer seeks to deliberately limit product life in order to increase the replacement rate. And in fact, this law has made a planned obsolescence as a legal offense with penalties. So the aim of this is to send signals to the market, to the producers, and also to civil society to raise awareness about the issue of planned obsolescence. And I will show later on in my presentation that we are seeing the first effects of this law. It's quite slow. It's very new. But things are starting to move. We are also organizing an experimentation on the display of product lifetime to consumers with some voluntary companies. So this is ongoing. At the moment, we are working on suitcases, and the furniture sector is very interested as well and may join. So this experiment has the objective of, first of all, agree on how to measure the average lifetime of products, and it's quite sensitive, which is why, in fact, we don't have as many sectors as we would have hoped for participating, because some companies disagree on the possibility to provide an average lifetime to the market because of the importance of the use phase, for example. But other companies are interested. So it's not a surprise that we see the sectors of luggage, suitcases, furniture, because these are longer lasting products, so they want to highlight this quality of their products. And another thing is eco-design criteria linked to the extended producer responsibility schemes. So in the EPR scheme, if you design your product in order to extend its lifetime, then your EPR fee gets reduced. it's going to be introduced. There are already some criteria on eco-design, but not related to lifetime. So this is going to be introduced progressively as well. And then the next slide, please. Government and parliament initiatives on the consumption side. We adopted a law on consumption in 2014 that extended increased the rights of and the opportunities for consumers in the context of the legal guarantee of conformity, which is 2 years in France and in the EU for most products. But now in France, the burden of proof is put on the manufacturer for 2 years instead of 6 months. That is to say that it's for the manufacturer to prove that the defect comes from the use by the consumer and not from the manufacturer. So it's a way to make it easier for consumers to use their rights for repair, for example, or replacement. We prefer repair, but that's another story, in the context of the legal guarantee of conformity. And we also introduced an obligation to inform the consumer about the period during which the spare parts will be available. So that may sound a bit strange, but it's the fruit of a compromise. Ideally, it would have been better, obviously, to make it mandatory that spare parts are actually available. But as you know, when you make a regulation, it's always the fruit of a compromise, also with industry. So that's the first step, which is nonetheless quite interesting, because implicitly it means that the spare parts should be available, even if the obligation is put on the information about the time during which the spare parts will be available. So there's been a first study by the market surveillance authorities, and 1 year on, half of the retailers were implementing this regulation, which is good and not so good, because it should be 100% of them, since it's a regulation, but it's quite a new type of regulation, so we can provide them with a bit of time to adapt. So 50% is not so bad, but things can be improved also regarding the awareness of consumers, because it's a thing to introduce a regulation, but now we should put more focus on informing consumers about their new rights. And then there's another thing that we would like to see happening is an extension of this legal guarantee of conformity for more products when it's relevant, not for all products. So we are asking the European Commission, because this should be done at the European level, to look into the feasibility of extending the legal guarantee of conformity from 2 years to maybe 5 years for relevant products. And then I will finish with initiatives from the private sector and civil society. So, for instance, this new logo that has been introduced by the SEB company. SEB, it's household appliances, and so this is a logo that guarantees that the product is repairable for 10 years. So it's another approach which we are also integrating in our experimentation on the lifetime product display. The expected lifetime with a repair component. And so with this logo, Seb has opened a new large warehouse for spare parts, and also 3D printing is bringing a lot of new opportunities for spare parts availability and for repair. And also with this logo, for 10 years, it doesn't mean that it's not a guarantee for 10 years with free repair, but the company also commits that the cost of repair will be less or equal to the third of the price of buying a new product, so to make repair more competitive. And then last slide, please. Yeah, among private initiatives, like in many other countries, there is this new trend for repair cafes, and we have the Envy network as well, which is a very active network in the sector of the circular economy, with the social dimension as well. And to come back to our law on planned obsolescence of 2015, for the first time on 18th of September, so 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a first complaint by an NGO, which is an NGO that has specialized in the fight against planned obsolescence. So on the basis of the law, they have filed a complaint to the judge against alleged practices of planned obsolescence in the case of printers. So that is going to be very interesting to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. Lots of interesting points and hot off the press at the end there as well. I'm sure we're all looking forward to that interesting case and where that goes. Okay, we're going to move very quickly to Brazil next for Virginia to provide some perspectives and examples from Co2 Institute's work there. So, Virginia.
Hello, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, yeah.
Good. So, hi, my name is Virginia. I work at Co2 Institute for Conscious Consumption in Brazil. And what I'd like to do today is share the perspective of an institution that works on one of the aspects mentioned on the report, which is consumer awareness and information. This is our core activity, and tell you about how we've been doing this, what is our approach and our methodology, and some of the difficulties and insights we've had so far. So, Bettina, could you please change the slide? Thank you. Just a quick introduction about Co2 and what we do for those of you who don't know us. We're a Brazilian NGO that focuses on changing consumer behavior, and two of our main activities are communication, so through campaigns, events, and publications, and also education. So we have an online platform, for example, that focuses on bringing conscious consumption to children in public schools, which is a very good project. And we also work with companies internally, so we help them incorporate conscious consumption in their processes, their marketing strategies, or engaging employees, or quote unquote externally. We provide expertise in communicating sustainability attributes, for example. We were contacted, the reason why I'm speaking to you today is because we were contacted by one of our partner companies to help them develop an internal communication material looking to inform and mobilize employees, looking at them as consumers, to minimize their e-waste. The goal was to produce a base material that they could use in different medias, and also small and engaging sort of information pills, this is what we call them, and which could be translated into mobilizing images to gain the public's interest and make them want to get more informed. So next slide, please. Thanks. So the first steps, when we were working with e-waste, our goal was to stimulate people to question whether they actually need a new device, and if yes, which one, and to question where was the old one going and why was all of this important. So to tackle this assignment, so to speak, we had to take a step back and narrow down the topic we were going to talk about. This is very recurrent when working on these teams, because when we're looking at a consumer communications perspective, We understand that the context is huge. There's a lot of variables involved. But when we want to speak directly to consumers, we need to know what is more critical or what could be more effective or efficient from a consumption point of view. So what people can actually do. How can we be constructive instead of just informative in our communications? We also had to focus on our specific audience, which in this case were corporate employees. And we also had to do a lot of research. And this all congregated in our decision to speak about communication devices, because we've been noticing a trend of rapid increase in change rates, substitution rates, and thinking about the public, cell phones, smartphones, and tablets and computers were things that we assumed all of these people had in their daily lives, so it could be a good point of entry for us to speak about the e-waste in general. And I mentioned the research because, as Dr. Connie has mentioned before, sometimes even if you narrow down your message, when you go and start researching for the information to communicate, sometimes you have a lot of difficulty to find exactly what you want. So you have to take a step back and look at your message again and see if you can change it or something like this. So the information that we used on this material, food materials used in phones and notebooks, recycling sort of not against, but compared to the decrease of consumption. And this is also something that was pointed out in the report, that Brazil, as a developing country, we do have recycling initiatives, but they are, many of them are very informal. So even though we've seen an increase on this, we also need to be a little bit careful, because it's not a silver bullet, so it's not going to fix the problem of changing our devices very quickly. And also it might represent risks, also environmental risks, safety risks for the users, but also for the people that actually work in recycling. It's a very dangerous process at the moment. We wanted to communicate signs that a product might last longer, so the availability of spare parts and the complexity of changing them, and also consumer assistance policies from manufacturers and things like this. And when speaking of this, one thing that we noticed was very important was to focus on perceived obsolescence on these products specifically, because this is a major factor, which is a lot more data. Next slide, please, Bettina. Thank you. So very quickly, I'll walk you through our methodology. This is our methodological framework, and this bases all of our work, actually, all of our communication, our education activities, and we used it, but this is through empirical work that works the best. So we want to, just 1 second, we want to provide consumers with rational and emotional understanding of the impacts of consumption to create motivation for behavior change. And we need to complement this with the repertoire of new behaviors. You can pass, please, Bettina. Hi, is it? Oh, thanks. This is an example. I'm going to explain also the methodology a little bit through the example. This, I'm sorry, it's in Portuguese, so I figure you guys can understand what it says. But you remember I said we were going to do a small, effective piece of communication. So we have a message. This is an example of clothing. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the pieces that we did for the cell phones and the notebooks, because it's still an ongoing project. But we try to give a message, which is a positive message of something that you can do. So you need to think about buying a new pair of jeans, or you need to think about buying a new t-shirt. on the genes on the right, for example, we used water impacts on the production. We also used LCA analysis to arrive to this conclusion. So we try to give a message that people feel curious about reading our text, and then we link them to a post with a lot more information so that they can understand the impacts of their consumption and think about what they're doing, pretty much. So next slide, please. Then coming back to the experience on e-waste and electronic devices, what we found is that the communication for each type of product is always going to be different in terms of language, in terms of final product, and also in terms of impact, which agrees with what has been presented on the reports. And also that facts need to reach consumers, but it's necessary to always show a concrete, attainable course of action or change to be made, because when you research these topics, you find so many variables and so many things that you feel like people need to know, and they have the right to know. But when you're looking for a point of entry, you're always going to need a positive message or something constructive. Otherwise, you have the opposite effect, and it's demobilizing, because there's that feeling of like, oh, so if the problem is so huge, what am I as a consumer going to do? So looking for this positive message, sometimes it's a huge challenge. That most relevant aspects regarding the consumer need to be identified. I've spoken of this before, but pinpointing exactly where people can act now, because we know there's policy issues and infrastructure issues here in Brazil, but what can actually people do now? So that was something that we looked for. When speaking about products that fall under the perceived obsolescence category, we try to look a little bit at self-awareness and encourage this in people as well. Like, what is it exactly that you need? Why do you feel the need to buy a new device? For example, you see a new notebook and it's lighter and it has great screen resolution, but you use your computer just to answer emails and you've never taken off your desk. So do you effectively need to buy a new one, or does your current one still useful to you the way it is? And it sounds oversimplified and silly, but sometimes just asking yourself these questions and whether you're being over-influenced by the media is an insight that works very quickly. And this is, well, the last part is a personal sort of insight that I feel like the extending of the lifetime of certain products could also be made aspirational, also in a counterpoint to the aspirational marketing that comes with changing your devices, and that through this, maybe other economy models should be explored also in this communication methodology towards consumers. So speaking about sharing economies, not specifically on communication here, but every sort of product. So to try and bring new ways of engaging with your devices on a positive way might be a way to reach people effectively. So this has been my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer questions if you have any. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Interesting to hear how companies work on these issues internally, and also how to use an honest approach. That's great, thank you. I'm going to pass over next to Simon November from Belgian consumer organisation Test & Co to talk through a consumer-facing initiative. I'm afraid we've obviously been over-ambitious in trying to keep everything and all of these different interesting perspectives to an hour. So Simon will talk through some slides very quickly, but hopefully many or all of you are able to stay on just a little bit longer to hear that, and if you do still have questions, to ask them then. If you do have questions, again, please type them in the questions box so we can do that as quickly as possible as well. But Simon, you should be able to speak, I think. Simon, can you hear? Are you able to talk? And here's the final technical glitch right at the end. Was that Simon or not? Again, extra thank you to everyone for your patience, but great to see everyone staying online.
I think this is Bettina. While Ian is maybe trying to see with Simon the technical glitch, we can already tell you about the next steps that we're going to do with this work. So we will also talk about the report in one of the scientific sessions at the World Resources Forum in Geneva later this month. So any one of you who is gonna be attending that forum, please drop us a line. It would also be great to meet you and exchange on your ideas on this issue. Then we are organizing from the Consumer Information Program a workshop at the PLATE conference, which stands for Product Lifetimes and the Environment. And actually, Connie, who spoke to you before, is organizing that conference. And we're very excited already. So any questions, I'm sure Connie would also be very glad to answer. There's also a website with the agenda and the themes that will be covered. And our workshop will look into how you can engage consumers in product lifetime extension. So a lot around the issues that were also mentioned by our speakers just now. And then finally, we will also keep on working on this under the Consumer Information Program and looking at highlighting good practices and are still discussing what we can do in the longer term to help consumers extend the lifetime of products. And if you have any ideas or if you're working in this area and would like to work with others to bring your work to a wider audience, please let us know, because that's exactly what we're here for. And so now I'm checking back, Simon, if we can hear you by now, maybe.
Okay, well, we still try and work that out. There's also a question come through from Roberto to Virginia, asking what, in general, is the reaction of consumers to some of the work you've done?
Well, in general, for example, the images that I showed you guys before, this is part of a revamping that we've been doing on this material. So the images are new and the messages are new, and we've just started posting them on social media. And we've had a great response. In fact, people have been sharing and liking the content, but also what we were happiest about is that there's been lots of questions and lots of requests for more information. Hi.
I think that may have been Simon in the background talking.
Good.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Oh. Hi.
Yes,
yes.
Is that
I'm
Simon?
Gonna mute myself.
That's Simon. Simon is okay. Simon from Belgium.
Okay. Thanks, Virginia. Sorry to cut you off there. We can come back to that.
No worries. Welcome, Simon.
Hello everyone.
Hi, Simon. Bettina's just going to put your presentation up.
Yes.
I'm happy to say that almost everyone is staying on the line, so that suggests everyone's very interested and involved. So
let's hope
once
so.
That presentation's coming up, here you go. You can fire through.
So maybe you should go directly to slide number 15.
I think that's done.
Is that done?
So Simon, maybe, I'm sorry, this is Bettina. We have 2 more minutes. Unfortunately, there is another webinar scheduled in our software after, so we will have to stop.
I'll be quick. So Testa & Coop is the largest consumer organization in Belgium. We have around 340,000 members, and we get a lot of complaints about fridges, washing machines, tumble dryers, smartphones becoming defective or breaking down too soon. So we did a few durability tests ourselves, but we noticed that those are very, very expensive and and that it's difficult to know where to look. So that's why we created a contact point where consumers can report the different durability issues of the product they purchased. So we can make inquiries to the market. Well, how does it work? It's on a slide. It's very simple to show. If you could go to slide 18 and 19, please. Okay. Yes, this one. Okay, that's the front page of our website. It's in Dutch. Unfortunately, we speak French and Dutch, not English. By using this site, people can make contributions, notifications about which products that don't function anymore. So photo cameras, laptops, televisions, tablets, washing machine, tumble dryers, and so on. If you can go to the next slide. I took the example of a photo camera. Next slide. So it's very easy to use. That's because we address ourselves to consumers in Belgium, so it has to be easy. So people can click on photo cameras. Next slide. Then they can select the brand and the type of photo camera. In this case, it's really a burden to keep it updated because there are so many types of products, so many brands. But we do our best. So in this example, a photo camera from the Canon brand model digital Ixus 100 IS. Next slide. So, and then people can say what is the defect, where does the product fail, what is the age of the product when the failure first occurred, and then they can give more information about the failure. People can say to us if they try to repair the product the product, because often that's an issue. So the reparation of a product is impossible. It's too expensive. So producers push consumers to renew all the time. So we want to make sure that we knew why people didn't choose the option to repair. So next slide. That's all. So then I can give my name. I accept the privacy standards, and that's it. Then I made a contribution. What we are trying to do is we analyze all those contributions. We have around 6,500 contributions up till now. But if I launch a social media campaign, which costs obviously a lot of money, tomorrow, then we get immediately another few thousand contributions. So it's really a popular topic. It's everybody in the media spoke about it when we first launched it, and it's really a treasure full of interesting data. So in 2 minutes, that's I had to go too fast, but that's about yeah. In short, that's our initiative.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. What we'll do now, as we do have to close up, thank you very much to all of the speakers and to Simon there for being very quick at the end. We'll send round the presentations involved. We'll gather some of the questions that have come in. It may be worth us organising another, even a longer webinar, but we'll send around links to everything and a bit more of a summary perhaps on the website that Simon showed, Trophy Use, as well. But thank you everyone for joining and for staying as well over the time limit, and to all of the speakers again, thanks very much, and sorry we've had to cut the discussion short.
Thank you very much.
And goodbye from us.
Thank you.
Thank you.